Buy and sell. This section in the newspaper, Izruk Vruki, is consistently popular among millions of less affluent Russians. It is often the only way to acquire needed items at a reasonable price, or, conversely, to sell things profitably. In most cases, both sellers and buyers are satisfied with each other. Trusting citizens announce to the world the items they own, and various people read these ads very attentively. On February 10, 1998, Robert Borisovich Kigorin, a resident of the area, reported to the Philly Davidico Internal Affairs Department that his son Konstantin and his wife Valeria had not returned home the day before. The only thing Konstantin had planned to do that day was sell a Grand Jeep, and he had placed an ad in the newspaper, Izruk Ruki, quickly. An unknown man responded to the ad and arranged a meeting. He arrived at the Kigorins' home, where the car was parked. Robert Borisovich went with Konstantin to the parking lot. The man arrived, quickly looked over the car. I stayed in the car. They walked around the car together. The color wasn't right. He said he would call and we would arrange something. Late in the evening, the Kigorins' apartment received a call. It was the same buyer who said he was ready to purchase the vehicle and scheduled a meeting for the next morning. Konstantin spoke with the buyer and asked his father to wake him up early at 7:30 because he went to work at 8. Robert Borisovich agreed, but after that he did not see his son or his wife again. With the Kigorins' help, investigators quickly created a composite sketch of the Jeep buyer. The only lead was the information that the Kigorins were supposed to meet the buyer in the Taganskaya Square area. On February 18, 1998, the Kuntsevo Inter-District Prosecutor's Office opened a criminal case concerning the disappearance of Konstantin and Valeria Kigorin, who were both 28 years old. In early March, the Kazayevs reported their son Valery's disappearance to the Nagorny Internal Affairs Department. Late the night before, Lyudmila Fyodorovna heard the phone ring. After talking to someone, Valery asked his mother to wake him up early in the morning. I woke him up at 7:30. There was so much snow, you couldn't see anything. The next day, Valery did not return home. Investigators managed to find out that he was planning to sell his car and had placed an ad in the newspaper. Regarding the disappearance of Valery Kazayev on March 26, 1998, the Chertonovo District Prosecutor's Office opened a criminal case. Valery was 41 years old. In April, the Perovo District Internal Affairs Department received a report from Larisa Spontu about her husband Valery's disappearance. He had also placed an ad in the newspaper to sell his Audi. On April 1st, a buyer called Larisa at her home and proposed a meeting the next day to view the car. Larisa never saw her husband again. On April 13th, the Perovo District Prosecutor's Office initiated a criminal case regarding Valery Spontu's disappearance. He was 36 years old. In the Moscow and Moscow Region District Prosecutor's Offices, a total of 8 criminal cases were opened concerning missing car owners. The problem was that none of the investigators knew that similar cases were being handled by neighboring districts. Everyone understood only one thing: people were disappearing in connection with the sale of their cars. Months passed with no leads on the perpetrators. During the investigative work, it was established that many of the missing people had been contacted by an unknown buyer who arranged meetings in central Moscow near Taganskaya Square, where approximately 20 auto repair shops servicing foreign cars were located. However, none of the checked repair shops raised suspicions. For 3 months following the disappearance of the first car owner, none of the prosecutors could make progress in locating the people and their vehicles until August 22nd. Sergei Zimin, a resident of the suburban town of Domodedovo, placed an ad to sell a Lada 21099. However, he used not his own phone number but that of Valentina, the sister of Valery, who lived in the town of Korolev. The unknown buyer called the number provided and asked to bring the car to Taganka. The next day, Zimin's relatives went to the local police station to report him missing. The case was assigned to Vasily Ledeniev, the deputy head of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Domodedovo Internal Affairs Department. He found out that the previous day, Zimin and his brother-in-law, Sergei Yakushin, had gone to sell the car. Zimin was driving his own car, while Yakushin was in a Mercedes. Neither returned home. The following day, to his surprise, Ledeniev discovered the Mercedes abandoned on the side of a street. Detectives went to Korolev and took statements from the relatives. 30 minutes after speaking with Yakushin's brother, the buyer called back, explaining that if Yakushin could arrive in Domodedovo by 9 a.m., he would explain how to get there. The buyer agreed and said he would come by 9 a.m. Yakushin, as if someone had lifted him out of bed, began noting down the phone number from the answering machine. The phone of Yakushin, equipped with a caller ID, had recorded the digits 356 30 155. For the first time, the operative had a solid lead. Ledeniev quickly traced the number, which turned out to be one of the phone lines at a military unit in Pechatniki, at Projected Passage, Building 8. The detectives immediately went there. When the car with the operatives arrived at the unit, it was around 5 p.m. From talking to the military personnel, they learned that an auto repair shop had been operating in one of the hangars for several years. The hangar's gates were closed, but noise from inside was clearly audible. The detectives found a peephole with a hidden camera and knocked. However, no one came out, and soon the noise stopped. They decided to wait. After some time, 2 Volgas drove up to the hangar. A man from one of the cars, identifying himself as the deputy commander of the military unit, and a police patrol from the other car, arrived. It turned out that this unit was one of the construction divisions under the Russian president. Seeing the detectives in their car, they approached and asked who they were and what they were doing there. The detectives explained they were trying to access the auto repair shop. The detectives presented their credentials, but the suspects claimed that they were fake and that their true value on Arbat Street was only 20 rubles. However, the conversation didn't end there. We not only showed them our credentials, but also our service weapons. At that point, they started treating us with somewhat more respect, saying, well, since you have weapons, you must really be police officers. The weapon turned out to be the most convincing argument. Now, police officers along with detectives demanded to open the gates. Apparently, the police uniforms convinced the auto service owner and he opened the hangar. He felt very confident. Naturally, he claimed to know nothing about Yakushin. Detectives were not authorized to conduct a search without a prosecutor's sanction, but they could detain the owner for 36 hours for questioning. The owner turned out to be Nagorny. He felt perfectly at ease, as if he were the master here. Yes, there were high-ranking officers, colonels, who walked around and, so to speak, covered for him. It seemed as though he could have been taken away, but for what reason? Despite Nagorny's persistent silence and refusal to admit he had called Yashin, the most terrifying suspicions began to be confirmed. Among other items retrieved from the basement was a women's sheepskin coat with blue lipstick in its pockets, as well as a receipt from Davidkov for 6,500 rubles. Soon, they found something that left no doubt about the fate of the missing car owners, the number and documents for Kigrin's car. At that moment, however, detectives from Domodedovo still did not know who Kigrin was. Querying Moscow, Ledeniev discovered that the car and its owner were wanted. MUR, Moscow Criminal Investigation Department, then took over the case. The investigation was led by the head of the Homicide Investigation Unit, Andrei Karpov. Finally, all the citizens' reports about their relatives disappearing in connection with car sales were included in the case. From the few witnesses, a composite sketch of the unknown buyer was created based on his description. Kigrin identified the buyer. It turned out to be the auto service owner, Evgeny Olegovich, born June 1970. I recognized him immediately. There was still no evidence linking Evgeny Nagorny to the disappearances. At the same time, a group of MUR operatives conducted a second search of the auto service. Upon closer inspection of one of the cars in the workshop, detectives noticed fresh asphalt distinctly showing beneath it. They removed the layer and started digging, but found nothing special underneath. They dug deeper and found a concrete slab. Just as they were about to cover the hole back up, they came across something soft. It was a bag containing the belongings of the missing people. This time, there were clear traces of blood on the items. There was no longer any doubt about the fate of the missing car owners. But where were the victims themselves? The owner continued to remain silent. The operatives, sensing the urgency, searched every corner of the hangar and found an empty magazine and a holster, but no gun. Nagorny continued to deny everything. If the detective's suspicions were correct, the terrifying truth was that one person alone could not have committed so many murders. He must have had accomplices. The operatives decided to set up surveillance. Two unknown individuals headed towards the hangar. They took out keys and began to open the gates, but did not manage to enter. The nighttime visitors were residents of the Pechatniki district, old-school friends Savytsky and Panin. The detainees were taken to the local police station, where they were to be interrogated the next morning. Savytsky was found unconscious, handcuffed, and tied with a shoelace from his sports pants. He was immediately hospitalized at the Savytsky Institute, where doctors struggled to bring him out of the comatose state. Everyone understood that Savytsky had more than serious reasons to be on the verge of suicide. He was transported from the hospital to the Fili Davidkovo Internal Affairs. At this point, the law came into practice. After Savytsky confirmed his intention to tell the truth, he cried and confessed to everything. The people were killed right in the hangar, and their bodies were buried there. And he showed the very spot where they had already been digging. The detectives started digging nearby and soon saw something they would hardly ever forget. From the pit, the bodies of 5 people were extracted. A few days later, they uncovered another 5 bodies, which had been buried in a different part of the hangar and were covered with concrete. After identifying the 10 bodies of the deceased car owners, the hopes of many dozens of people for a miracle were shattered. Until the last moments, we hoped that my father might be found alive. The first case was handed over to the Moscow City Prosecutor's Office. The investigation was led by Special Cases Investigator Vladimir Mayer. Nagorny lost control of himself. The thirst for blood apparently continued and did its work. As a result of interrogations and investigative experiments, during which Savytsky gave his testimony calmly, much was revealed. Gradually, the horrifying picture of the crimes began to emerge. In the fall of 1997, Savytsky met with a native of Ukraine, Evgeny Nagorny. Having served in the army a few years prior, Nagorny moved to Moscow and worked as a tinsmith in an auto repair shop. After saving some money, Nagorny decided to start his own business, renting a hangar from a military unit, where he took up auto repair and hired Savytsky as his assistant. Everything was going well until one day a client's expensive Jeep was accidentally burned. Nagorny began to think about how to compensate for the loss. The plan came together quickly. He placed an advertisement in the newspaper from hand to hand for the sale of an expensive car. The next day, he met with someone posing as a buyer and set one condition: to inspect the car at a specially equipped location, namely the auto repair shop. He suggested driving there together and took the wheel himself, agreeing immediately on the price, which was part of the deception. Here's how it worked. Savytsky was already waiting at the auto repair shop's gates. The car was driven inside, the gates were closed, and the victims, whose fate was sealed, were left alone with armed bandits. The criminals acted coolly. To avoid damaging the car with bullet marks, they approached the trunk or hood and then immediately shot the person in the head. The person was dead, and the car remained intact. Nagorny and Savytsky would then throw the bodies, with bags over their heads, through a hatch into a sewer pit under the hangar floor. When the pit was full, it was covered with sand and cemented over. Then they dug another pit and began to discard the bodies there. By mid-April, this second pit was nearly full. When investigators asked Savytsky why he committed these atrocities, the answer was prosaic: for the money. Nagorny was subjected to a lie detector test, a newly implemented investigative practice. The results were very clear, indicating with high probability that Nagorny was directly involved in the murders of 11 people and was one of the perpetrators. But where is the murder weapon? Savytsky claimed he didn't know where the gun was. It was hidden by Nagorny himself. Since the entire hangar had already been searched, they decided to check the roof and found the gun lying on one of the support beams. Ballistic analysis confirmed that the car owners had been killed with this weapon. Nagorny confessed to everything, closing the case. Meanwhile, after the interrogations and investigative experiments, Savytsky began experiencing severe psychological issues, falling into a reactive state. According to the forensic psychiatric evaluation, Savytsky was deemed insane and sent for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. The investigators were unable to prove the involvement of Panin, who was detained with Savytsky, in the case. As a result, only Nagorny ended up on trial at the Moscow City Court. However, on the very first day, he refused to testify, claiming that the prosecutors had forced his confession. After that, Nagorny continued his behavior, standing with his back to everyone and refusing to answer any questions posed by the judge. Without receiving answers, Judge Olga Timokhina reached a simple and frightening conclusion. People are capable of committing horrific crimes for even modest material gain, without considering the consequences. It required extraordinary audacity to use one's phone to call someone you plan to kill the next day. The court sentenced Evgeny Nagorny to life imprisonment. He then appealed to the Supreme Court, and copies of this appeal were sent to all the victims, including Larissa. Nagorny claimed he considered himself a law-abiding citizen. In reality, he might be one of the most terrifying killers of recent times, who, ironically, presented himself as a fighter against violence and cruelty. The Supreme Court upheld the sentence, but many questions remained unanswered. No one could believe that all the murders were committed by just two people. Nagorny nearly admitted this in his final statement. "I was doing my job for regular clients, respectable people." Savytsky mentioned a special notebook where requests from unknown clients were recorded, indicating that all the cars were sold to order. For instance, "My husband and brother arrived for a meeting in two cars, one in a Mercedes. They could have simply taken the money, but they likely knew whom they were selling the cars to." The case was not fully resolved, as serious influential forces might have been behind Savytsky and Nagorny. Judge Olga Timokhina and others believe that the crimes were commissioned, and these individuals might still be operating while their deadly activities continue in a new auto repair shop.